My name is Evelyn, and I'm 31 years old, currently working as an art teacher at a small high school in Washington. Throughout my life, I always believed in one thing. Family is irreplaceable. But that belief shattered bitterly just a few days after my beloved grandmother passed away. Margaret, my grandmother, raised me with the gentlest details of life. She taught me how to brew mint tea, embroider handkerchiefs, and notice the beauty in sunlight pouring through stained glass windows. She didn't lecture about values, she lived them, quietly and consistently. To me, she was a steady, silent light. Her home, a wooden farmhouse dating back to the early 1900s, was the heart of my childhood summers. Every brick, every window pane held memories. She once whispered to me on an autumn afternoon, "This house will be yours, Evelyn, because only you can see it with your heart." I never saw that as a promise of inheritance. To me, it was her way of saying I belonged there, deeply, unshakably. When she passed away, I received a sealed envelope from a law firm, delivered express, with one instruction: do not open until after the reading of the will. I carried it with me to the family gathering at the old house, where everyone was assembled to hear the will. The air was heavy, not just with grief, but tension I couldn't yet name. Mr. Hawthorne, the elderly lawyer, read the will slowly, and just as Grandma had once told me, she left the house to me, Evelyn, her trusted granddaughter. But before I could even react, my mother, Linda, reached for the keys on the table as if they belonged to her. "You're just emotional right now, Evelyn," she said, her voice sugary sweet but icy cold. "This house needs too much work. Your father and I just want to spare you the burden." I turned to my father, Robert, who only looked down, hands clenched, avoiding my gaze. No one was speaking about my grandmother as a person. They were treating her home like a transaction. "I don't need to be spared," I said, my voice trembling. "Grandma left it to me. It's in the will. I have the right." From the corner of the room came a mocking chuckle. Jonas, my brother, leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Do you even know how high the property taxes are? On a teacher's salary? Keeping this house is a fantasy." The lavender scent from the garden still lingered in the air. Less than a month ago, Grandma and I were sipping tea in the sunroom as she told me stories of her first love, smiling gently. And now, I was watching my family tear her memory apart like a clearance sale. "You can't do this," I said, almost choking. Clara, my younger sister, stepped in, her face expressionless. "Mom and Dad have legal authority over the estate. The transaction is done." My blood ran cold. "What transaction?" Linda, adjusting her silk blouse, replied calmly, "We found a buyer. It's a generous offer, above market value. The paperwork is signed. There's nothing left to discuss." Still holding the unopened envelope, I walked out of the room in silence. But inside, I knew. This wasn't over. That night, with only the sound of crickets outside, I opened the envelope. Inside was a note and a small brass key. "To my dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, then things have unfolded exactly as I expected. But don't worry, I've left something they can't touch. Look beneath the third brick in the garden wall, the one with the sparrow carving. Love always finds its way if you believe." Grandma. My heart raced. Grandma never relied on papers or power. She believed in truth, and in me. I used to think that the deepest wounds only came from enemies. But no, it turns out the most painful scars are inflicted by those we call family. Just 1 week after my grandmother, my dearest person, passed away, everything I believed about family was shattered. And the most heartbreaking part was that the betrayal didn't come with shouting or drama, but wrapped in sweet words disguised as concern. I'll never forget that fateful afternoon. In the familiar living room, once echoing with my grandmother's laughter, tension hung like thick fog. When Mr. Hawthorne, our lawyer, announced that Grandma Margaret had left the house to me, Evelyn, the first reaction wasn't joy or support. It was a flicker in my mother's eyes, as if confirming something she had long expected. Without waiting, she reached for the keys on the table. "You're overwhelmed, sweetheart. Let us handle this for you," she said, her voice syrupy but hollow. "I don't need help," I replied, gripping the sealed envelope tightly. "She left the house to me." My father, Robert, remained silent, avoiding my gaze. He always hid behind silence. And then Jonas, my older brother, chimed in with a blow that hit me hard. "Evelyn, wake up! You can't afford this house. On a teacher's salary? Don't let your emotions make dumb decisions." I wanted to respond, but Clara, my younger sister, cut in. "You don't understand. Mom and Dad have legal authority. The transaction is already completed." "What?" My voice shook. "We found a buyer," my mother added, adjusting her collar. "Good offer. Over market value. The papers are signed." I froze. I hadn't signed anything. That night, I stayed in the house alone. I opened the envelope Grandma had left. Inside was a key and instructions to look behind a specific brick in the garden wall. And another note. "They'll try to take everything, but there's something they don't know about." By flashlight, I found the brick with a carved sparrow and inside, a tin box wrapped in vintage floral fabric, just like Grandma. Inside were thick documents, a USB, and a letter. "Evelyn, they'll try to steal what's not theirs." But I was one step ahead. "Take this to Abigail Hart, my lawyer. Trust no one else." The next morning, I met Abigail. After reading everything, she said firmly, "Your grandmother was thorough. This is a valid legal amendment to the original will, notarized 6 months before her death." "What does it say?" I asked. "There's a clear clause," she said. "This house cannot be sold without your direct, verified consent, confirmed by me." "But they said the sale was complete. They said I signed it." She handed me the contract. My name was there, but the signature wasn't mine. The swooping E? My mother's handwriting. "Can we prove forgery?" I asked. "Absolutely," Abigail nodded. "If you have proof you weren't here." "I was in Denver. Plane ticket, hotel bills, social media check-ins, all of it." She smiled slightly. "Then we have the upper hand." When I returned to the house later that day, the locks had been changed. A handwritten note taped to the door read, "No entry. Property under buyer management." I stood still, fists clenched in my pockets. Did they really think a lock could erase everything my grandmother left me? I texted Abigail. "They changed the locks. I'm not backing down. Let's move forward." That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about honor, memory, and the love of a grandmother who had placed her trust in me above all others. After meeting with Abigail and confirming that my grandmother's will amendment was fully valid, I didn't sleep that night. My heart burned, not only with anger and betrayal, but with an unwavering resolve. My grandmother had trusted me, and now it was my turn to carry out the plan she had quietly set in motion during her final years. The next morning, I returned to her house, not as a sidelined granddaughter, but as the rightful keeper of her truth. In my hands was a copy of the temporary legal order blocking any transfer of the property, along with authorization from Abigail's office. She had ensured that I would never be locked out again. Outside the door, Jonas was fumbling with his keys. He looked up, startled when he saw me. "Mom told me to grab a few things from the library," he mumbled. I didn't break eye contact. "And the forged signature on the sale contract? Was that just following orders too?" He didn't respond. After a few seconds, he sighed, pulled the key from the lock, and silently handed it to me. I stepped inside. The soft scent of dried lavender still lingered in the air. My grandmother's portrait still hung in its usual place, her eyes gentle, as if watching me. I walked straight to the library, the room she had spent countless hours reading, writing, and storing her most personal things. I traced my fingers along the wooden trim behind the third bookshelf, just as my mother had unwittingly revealed during the secret conversation Abigail had recorded. I felt a barely noticeable bump, a hidden notch that only someone who knew to look would find. A faint click echoed. A wooden panel popped open. Inside was a small compartment lined with delicate velvet. There were 4 rolled-up paintings in protective tubes, a wooden box engraved Eleanor B., and a red wax-sealed envelope. Carefully, I lifted the envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's script, were the words, "For Evelyn, when you're ready to face the truth." I opened it. The note read, "It's not the paintings themselves that must be protected, but the story behind them. The truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always find the light." My heart pounded. I opened the wooden box. It contained a notebook with provenance records of each artwork, letters exchanged with an art appraiser named Helen Reeves, and photocopies of old European shipment receipts for artwork transfers. Abigail arrived moments later. Her eyes sharpened as she scanned the materials. "Evelyn, you're not just inheriting a home. You're holding evidence of an international art trafficking operation." I stood speechless. My grandmother had known. She hadn't just tried to preserve the house. She had been collecting evidence, tracking every detail, waiting for the right moment when the truth could be spoken aloud. Abigail nodded firmly. "We'll follow the proper legal channels, report it, protect the evidence, and bring everything to light." I looked around the room. Once a peaceful haven, now the epicenter of a storm. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I felt that my grandmother was still with me, standing beside me. From the moment I uncovered the documents hidden behind the library wall, everything shifted. It was no longer just about betrayal or exclusion. It was about justice. And in my hands, I now held the weapon of truth, enough to end every lie my family had constructed. I drove to Abigail Hart's law office, the same elegant building where we had first met. She was already waiting for me, her eyes sharp, like someone preparing for battle at dawn. I placed the file, USB, and all of my grandmother's documents on her desk. "You'll want to see this," I said. Abigail opened the materials with care. She read quickly but thoroughly. With each page turned, her expression grew more focused, more intense. "Evelyn," she said finally, "your grandmother wasn't just wise, she was strategic. What you have here is a legally binding addendum to her will, properly notarized and fully enforceable. Can you help me get the house back?" I asked. Abigail didn't hesitate. "Not just the house. If we prove that your signature was forged, this goes beyond a property dispute. This is signature fraud, and it carries criminal consequences." I nodded. "I was in Denver on the day they claimed I signed the contract. I've got my flight ticket, hotel receipts, social media check-ins, everything." "Perfect," she said. "First, I'll send an emergency legal notice to the buyer to suspend any transfer. Then we'll request a forensic signature analysis and file an official complaint." She immediately began drafting the documents, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. Soon, she picked up the phone and contacted the buyer's legal team. His name was Daniel Grayson, a real estate investor from Sacramento. "He believes you agreed to the sale," Abigail said. "We need to meet him face to face and expose the truth." That afternoon, in Abigail's office, Daniel Grayson arrived, tall, polished, with the composed air of someone used to being in control. But when he saw me, his calm wavered just slightly. "You must be Evelyn," he said. I nodded. "The house you're buying belongs to my grandmother, and the contract you signed, there's a serious issue." Abigail slid the contract toward him. "The signature on that document is not Evelyn's," she stated. "More importantly, this property was protected by a notarized will addendum. It cannot be sold without Evelyn's verified consent, confirmed by me, her lawyer." Daniel's brows furrowed. "They told me she agreed. She just couldn't be there to sign." "I was in Denver that day," I said. "I have proof." A few moments passed in silence. Daniel leaned back, processing. "They said the house was a burden. No one wanted to keep it. That the family had agreed to sell." Abigail kept her voice calm. "Mr. Grayson, can you walk us through the communication? Emails? Messages?" He nodded. "I've got nothing to hide. Linda, Evelyn's mother, pushed me to sign quickly. She said if I didn't, they'd move to another buyer." He opened his phone. "She even wrote, 'The girl can't interfere. This is for the family's benefit.'" My chest tightened. That single sentence was colder than anything I'd heard so far. Abigail scribbled notes quickly. "Your information will be extremely useful. Can you sign a statement?" "Of course," Daniel said. "I don't want any part of a fraudulent deal." As he left, we exchanged a firm handshake. Abigail turned to me, eyes gleaming. "They thought you wouldn't fight back," she said. I held her gaze. "But they forgot one thing." "What's that?" she asked. "That truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it." The meeting with Daniel Grayson was a turning point. When even the buyer confirmed he had been deceived, not by strangers, but by my own family, I knew the game had changed. Abigail called it the counteroffensive phase. In the days that followed, we worked tirelessly, building our strategy. The goal: block the sale, gather signature forgery evidence, secure witnesses, and most importantly, expose the full extent of the fraud, including the illegal sale of the hidden paintings. Abigail filed an emergency motion with the local court to suspend all activity tied to the property. Within 24 hours, the judge approved a protective order prohibiting any tampering, removal, or entry. That night, I returned to my grandmother's home, but found the locks changed again. A paper on the door read, "No entry, property under buyer management." I stood frozen, fury rising in my chest. How dare they? But I wasn't alone anymore. I pulled out my phone and messaged Abigail. "They changed the locks again, but I'm not backing down. Let's move forward." The next day at Abigail's office, she laid out a clear plan. 1. File a criminal complaint about the forged signature and request forensic examination. 2. Use Daniel's statement and messages from my mother as evidence of intentional deception. 3. Compile every document my grandmother had hidden, letters, artwork appraisals, and our secret recordings. Identify potential allies within the family, anyone who might still have a conscience. I paused at the last point. "Do you really think anyone in my family would help?" Abigail replied calmly. "Let them choose. Not because you need them, but because truth needs voices from within." I didn't expect it. But days later, the first to reach out was Clara, my younger sister. We met that evening at a quiet cafe near our old high school. Clara sat in the corner, hands wrapped around her coffee, eyes clouded more with conflict than regret. "You were right, Evelyn," she said softly. "I looked through Mom's drawer. There are 2 wills, one is forged, and there are shady financial records from Dad's company." I blinked. "They're hiding something bigger?" Clara nodded. "The company's under audit. They're selling Grandma's house to cover up the mess. They lied. To everyone." I clenched my fist. "Would you testify if this goes to court?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I can't pretend anymore." The next afternoon, the 3 of us, Clara, Abigail, and I, sat with a city police investigator, Detective Gregory Hale. After reviewing our evidence, the forged contract, Daniel's testimony, and the audio recording, he said, "We have enough to open a criminal investigation. If these paintings are authentic, this may qualify as organized art trafficking." Abigail nodded. "And if we find more evidence, can arrests be made?" "Absolutely," he confirmed. That night, armed with the court order, Abigail and I legally entered the house. Behind the 3rd bookshelf in the library, as my grandmother had hinted, we found 4 carefully preserved paintings, a wooden box, and a sealed envelope labeled, "To Evelyn, when you're ready for the full truth." I opened the letter. "It's not the paintings that matter, but why I protected them. They would trade their honor to preserve their image. But you, Evelyn, choose the path your heart tells you is right." I looked at Abigail. "Now what?" She smiled. "Now it's Justice's turn to speak. I once thought reclaiming the house would be the end of my journey, but I was wrong. It was just the beginning." When Abigail and I handed over all our evidence to Detective Gregory Hale, he spent the entire morning reviewing every detail: the forged contract, my grandmother's handwritten letters, the hidden artwork records, and the audio recording of the secret family meeting. He missed nothing. Eventually, he looked up. His face no longer just reflected the calm of a seasoned officer. It showed the cold clarity of someone staring at a well-concealed criminal network. "What you've brought here," he said, "goes far beyond a family property dispute. This points to clear indicators of money laundering, tax evasion, and potentially organized art trafficking." I was stunned. Even with everything I had already uncovered, hearing those words still shook me. My parents, the people who once nursed me through fevers, had become entangled in something criminal. Abigail, ever composed, replied, "We believe Robert Bennett's company, Bennett and Company, used their furniture exports to smuggle high-value artwork from Europe. The documents Eleanor left behind suggest this scheme may have been active for years." Detective Hale nodded. "I'll need to run the artwork through the international lost art databases. If any piece matches the red list from Interpol or the International Art Council, this could escalate to federal criminal charges." Days later, we received a reply from Helen Reeves, the art appraiser who had once worked closely with my grandmother. Her verdict was staggering. 2 of the 4 paintings hidden in the library were confirmed as looted art from the 1940s, once owned by a Jewish family in France during World War II, seized by the Nazis. Their estimated value was in the millions. I sat frozen, realizing my family had kept war-looted treasures, intending to sell them off to save a collapsing company. It was not desperation anymore, it was moral bankruptcy. Abigail immediately printed the appraisal, attached Helen's letter, and submitted it to Detective Hale. The detective contacted us shortly after with a direct request. Join him at the Arlington Hotel that evening. He had received a tip that my parents planned to finalize a second sale meeting there. That night, I wrapped myself in a long coat, heart racing, clutching a hard drive containing audio files. To my surprise, Vanessa, my once silent sister, called and asked to come. She said simply, "I used to think Mom did this for us. But now I see. She only did it to stay in control." We rented room 705, directly beside the suite booked for the meeting. Abigail installed a recorder in the power outlet. I pressed my ear to the wall. Across the thin plaster, I heard my mother's voice. "We must finish tonight. Auditors will be in by Monday. If the funds aren't there, they'll start digging." Then my father's voice, hoarse. "We can't let everything fall apart because of her." A third man, likely the art broker, spoke. "I want proof these paintings are authentic. If they're truly from the 1940s, they're worth millions." My mother replied firmly, "You'll have them, but never contact Evelyn. She has no more rights." I turned to Abigail. She nodded. "We have enough." We left the hotel without a sound, and for the first time since this all began, I realized something. My life had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. The morning after the Arlington Hotel recording, I woke up with an unusual feeling, not confusion, not fear, just clarity. The truth had been recorded, the evidence was in hand, and now it was time for those who had stayed silent to make their choice again. My phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa, my ever-perfect sister, the one who always obeyed our mother. The message read simply, "We need to talk." I agreed. An hour later, we met at a small cafe tucked in a quiet side street. Vanessa was already seated, her hand tightly wrapped around her coffee cup, her eyes fixed on the window like she was battling her conscience. "You know," she began softly, "I always believed in Mom. I thought everything she did was for the family, but after hearing that recording, I realized I've been closing my eyes for far too long." I stayed silent, letting her speak. "I thought you were just fighting over property, but now I understand. You're trying to salvage the last bit of honor Grandma left us." I said gently, "I'm not doing this to destroy anyone. I'm doing this because the truth shouldn't be buried." Vanessa nodded. "I saw what Mom hid. Alternate contracts, painting transfer documents, even company files tied to shady deals, and there was a list. It had your name, Brandon's too." I looked at her intently. "I need you to testify. I need you to speak up." She fell silent for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "If it helps clear Grandma's name, I will." That afternoon, I was in Abigail's office when the door opened. Brandon stepped in. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't happy either. He stood quietly for a few seconds, then said, "You were right. I messed up." I looked at him, my pain showing clearly. "You forged my signature." Brandon nodded. "I know. It was the worst decision I've ever made." "Why?" "Because Mom said if we didn't sell the house, the company would be investigated. Dad might face charges. I panicked, and I chose their side." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "But when I saw you standing your ground, I started feeling ashamed." I said nothing. Brandon stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. "This is everything I copied from the company's hard drive. They didn't just hide paintings. They used fake shipping codes, forged invoices, even had underground deals with a foreign contact." Abigail picked up the documents, her expression tightening. "If this is accurate, it's the final piece we need." Brandon turned to me. "If you need me to testify, I will. I don't want to be silent anymore." 3 days later, we sat in a meeting room with Detective Gregory Hale. Spread across the table were Vanessa's evidence, Brandon's documents, the artwork appraisals, and the full recordings. Hale looked over everything, then said, "We have enough to press full criminal charges. not just for property fraud, but for money laundering, illegal art trade, and financial conspiracy. I glanced at the two who had once stood on the sidelines, now sitting beside me, quiet but firm. No one had to say it out loud, but I knew. They had woken up. That evening, the city sky was cloaked in gray, mirroring the heaviness in my chest. Every step brought me closer to the Regency Hotel, where, according to information from Vanessa and Brandon's documents, my mother, Linda, and father, Robert, were set to finalize their illegal deal, handing over stolen artwork to a foreign collector. I wasn't alone. Abigail walked beside me, eyes sharp, a discreet recording device hidden inside her coat. Vanessa followed with a folder clutched to her chest, packed with copied documents, financial records, forged contracts, threatening texts, and the list of concealed assets. Detective Gregory Hale waited downstairs, ready to act if things escalated. We booked room 705, directly adjacent to room 706, the meeting room. Abigail swiftly plugged the recorder into an outlet by the wall, and soon the voices from the next room came through, clear as if they were speaking beside us. First, that chillingly familiar voice, my mother's. "We only have tonight. By Monday morning, the auditors come. If the money isn't in the account, they'll review 3 years of records." Then my father, tense and low. "I've sent the shipping code to the French buyer. They're ready to wire the money once the artwork is received." A third man chimed in, likely the buyer's representative. "If the paintings are genuinely pre-war, I'll pay market value. But I need assurance. There can be no legal interference." Linda let out a light, hollow laugh. "That girl, Evelyn, has no legal standing. We have power of attorney, her signature, the sale papers, everything's handled." I stood frozen. Vanessa squeezed my hand beneath the table. Abigail remained focused, jotting down time codes. Then my mother again. "The paintings are behind the bookshelf in the library. Eleanor thought she could outsmart us, but I know that house better than anyone. We'll retrieve them tomorrow morning before anyone interferes." Silence fell over our room. Those weren't just lies anymore. They were confessions. "Is it enough?" I whispered. Abigail nodded. "More than enough." She texted one word to Detective Hale. "Ready." 5 minutes later, room 706's door burst open. There was a shuffle, chairs scraping, startled voices. We stepped out to face them. My mother's eyes widened. "Evelyn?" I didn't answer. Abigail raised a court order, along with police-issued documentation confirming lawful surveillance. Detective Hale entered calmly, flanked by officers. "Linda and Robert Bennett, you are under investigation for property fraud, forgery, and illegal transportation of stolen artwork." As their luggage was searched, 2 paintings were uncovered, carefully wrapped in old cloth, bearing antique seals, exactly as described by my grandmother. Linda's phone contained full transcripts of conversations with the foreign buyer, including price agreements and efforts to obscure the origin. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice cracking. "I thought you did all this for the family, but really, it was just to protect your power." My mother said nothing. She looked at me, not angry, not ashamed, just empty, as if she had nothing left to say. The night we recorded the meeting at the Regency Hotel, I knew something much bigger had been set in motion. This was no longer a family dispute. It was now a full-scale investigation into fraud, forgery, and international art trafficking, with my own parents at the center of it. Early the next morning, Detective Gregory Hale called an emergency meeting at the city police department. Abigail, Vanessa, Brandon, and I were present. On the table lay all our evidence: audio recordings, Images of the recovered artwork, forged contracts, testimony from the buyer, internal company files, and links to foreign partners. "We've submitted a request for collaboration with federal crime units," Hale said, placing his hand on the thick folder. "This is no longer just tax evasion or forged paperwork. There is clear evidence pointing to an international art smuggling network." No one spoke. We all knew this had gone far beyond family. Hale continued. "Tonight, law enforcement will carry out the arrest of Linda and Robert Bennett and execute a full search warrant for the house and company office." As the sun set, we gathered outside the house that once belonged to my grandmother, a place of warmth now turned into a scene for legal reckoning. When the police cars pulled up, my heart nearly stopped. I stood with Vanessa and Brandon. No words were exchanged, but I could feel their inner turmoil, grief, guilt, and a strange sense of relief. Abigail stood beside me, nodding once. "Now it's Justice's turn to speak." Police knocked. My mother, Linda, opened the door in a silk robe, pale and speechless. My father stood behind her, composed as always, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "Linda Bennett, Robert Bennett," the officer declared, "you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, money laundering, and illegal transport of stolen artwork." There was no resistance. My mother simply whispered, "I knew this day would come." Handcuffs clicked in the silence, metallic echoes marking the end of a long, dark lie. Officers swept through the home. From the library to the basement, every inch was searched. They uncovered over a dozen paintings, foreign banking paperwork, hard drives with emails to international buyers, and a hidden safe behind an antique portrait. Inside was a coded ledger listing special wood shipments, which actually referred to rare, smuggled paintings. I stood in the living room, eyes on my grandmother's portrait. Her soft gaze met mine, not judgmental, just quietly knowing. She had known all along, and she had left the clues for me to uncover. 3 days later, local news headlines exploded. "Well-known couple arrested in international art smuggling investigation." "Furniture brand Bennett & Company under scrutiny for global money laundering scheme." A will, a house, and a granddaughter's search for truth uncovers stunning family scandal. As I watched the news from the very couch where I used to sit and study with Grandma under oil lamps, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt peace, because finally, justice had come.